Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into the totally unseen, fascinating mechanics of subtitling. And trust me, it is so much more complex than just simple translation. You know, when you kick back to watch that new international series, you're literally witnessing a high-wire act of cognitive science, linguistics, and some seriously intense creative problem solving. So let's unpack the brilliant, invisible framework that makes all of this possible. Here's our roadmap for today. First, we're defining subtitle translation. Then we'll look at the physiological constraints, followed by linguistic adjustments and reduction, and finally, segmentation and coherence.
But before we get bogged down in the heavy theory, think about your own living room for a second. Have you ever watched a show where maybe you understood just a tiny bit of the spoken language, and you caught yourself wondering why the text on the screen didn't perfectly match what the actors were actually saying? You're like, wait, they definitely just talked for way longer than that. Well, guess what? You're not wrong. And it's actually not a mistake by the translator at all. It is a highly deliberate, scientifically backed decision.
Which brings us to Section 1, defining subtitle translation. According to researchers Jorge Diaz-Centas and Aline Ramel, we basically have to throw out the myth of a faithful rendering. Seriously, if you're expecting a literal word-for-word translation, you're kind of misunderstanding the whole medium. Subtitling is actually this highly creative adaptation. Academics often call it translation as rewriting. The translator isn't just moving words from language A to language B. They are completely rebuilding the dialogue from the ground up to serve a brand new audience, all while boxed in by some really intense physical limits. And this creative component? It's absolutely crucial for navigating hybrid cultural contexts and multilingual challenges. I mean, think about humor or local slang or some hyper-specific cultural reference. You can't just literally translate a joke, right? It would totally fall flat. The translator actually has to rewrite the intent of the scene so that it lands with the exact same emotional punch for you, the viewer, as it did for the original audience. This creative adaptation is pretty much the only way to successfully transfer culture across borders.
Moving on to Section 2, the physiological constraints.
Okay, so every great story needs tension. And in this explainer, our tension comes straight from human biology. Let's look at the severe physical limits that actually force translators to be so creative. Based on research by Evgenia Milenova, viewers can only comfortably read about 15 symbols per second. Why? Well, because we simply read way more slowly than people speak. When characters on screen are having this rapid-fire, highly emotional argument, the translator knows your eyes and your brain literally cannot process text as fast as the audio is playing. Our biology is the ultimate bottleneck here. This stark contrast really shows why subtitle translation is so drastically different from general translation. Think about it. If you're translating a novel or a document, you have unlimited space. You can add footnotes, you can expand paragraphs for days. It's purely text-oriented. But subtitling, it is strictly time-bound. Translators are capped at a maximum of just 72 to 80 symbols per line, depending on the screen. It transforms regular dialogue into what Milenova beautifully calls squeezed speech. You have to cram the entire emotional and narrative payload of a scene into this tiny, fleeting little box. The absolute crucial point here is that a translator isn't just fighting character limits, they are fighting for your cognitive bandwidth. While you're watching a film, your brain is doing double duty. It has to rapidly correlate the text with the on-screen images, the actors' subtle facial expressions, and the whole internal rhythm of the scene. If a translator throws a massive block of complex text at you, you're going to miss the actor's subtle tear or that crucial visual clue in the background. The text absolutely has to support the visual, not distract from it. All right, Section 3, linguistic adjustments and reduction. So, now that we understand the super strict physical and cognitive parameters boxing these translators in, let's look at the superpowers they use to break out of that box. How do they actually pull off this squeezed speech? Because of those physical constraints, Sintas and Ramel explain that text reduction is simply non-negotiable. Translators basically rely on two main tricks here. The first is partial reduction, or condensation, where you keep the core meaning but just use fewer words. The second is total reduction, which is omission. That's where you completely ditch non-essential stuff like filler words, stuttering, or repeated names that you obviously already know from watching the scene. Let's look at a real-world application of these condensation strategies. If a character says commenced, the translator will just swap it out for a shorter synonym, like began. Or instead of translating a clunky phrase like make an investigation of, they'll just use investigate. Another absolute genius move is converting negations to affirmatives. So instead of writing out they are not different, a translator might just write they are the same. It saves precious on-screen space and shaves off those crucial symbols per second, letting your brain process the text instantly. Down at the sentence level, translators are deploying this massive toolkit of linguistic gymnastics to manipulate sentence structures, making sure everything fits perfectly without ever breaking your immersion. They might change direct speech to indirect speech, like changing "he said I will come tomorrow" to just "he promised to come tomorrow." Or they might alter sentence subjects from passive to active to save a few words, or even merge two short, choppy sentences into one smooth line. It's like this continuous, invisible puzzle being solved right in front of your eyes.
Let's look at Section 4, Segmentation and Coherence.
So, how does all this build into the actual visual presentation? The next time you stream a foreign film, pay close attention to the line breaks. A good line break strictly follows syntactico-semantic principles to avoid a cognitive coherence breakdown. For instance, "I called him yesterday to discuss the project" is a great split because it pauses at a natural, logical unit. But if they split it like "I called him yesterday to discuss the project," that forces your brain to pause unnaturally. It breaks the cohesive unit and causes this tiny, frustrating microstutter in your reading rhythm. Trust me, good translators never, ever do that. As we wrap up this explainer, we really need to remember Sintas and Ramel's primary takeaway. Subtitling relies on relevance, not quantity. It is definitely not, as some critics claim, an impoverished language form. Instead, it is a total masterclass in efficiency. It's the delicate art of balancing reading effort with visual awareness, ensuring that the true essence of a culture and its story can be transmitted across the globe, despite the immense biological and physical constraints of the medium. Which leaves us with this final, provocative thought to ponder the next time you sit down to stream a movie. Knowing that literally every single line you read has been condensed, manipulated, and carefully rewritten to fit the exact reading speed of your human eye, are we experiencing the raw original culture or a brilliantly engineered linguistic illusion? Thanks so much for exploring the unseen art of subtitling with me today.